Good morning, everyone. Kris here with Inspired Energy, joining me, Hartwell, this morning. Good morning, Hartwell.
Good morning, Kris. Good morning, everyone.
So we apologize for not being on last week, but with the minus 40 temperature, I had tires to contend with and didn't get here on time. So we're going to continue with the ring of the Whirlwind, part two, looking at the gate 55, which we just touched on a little bit. So can you just recap a little bit about what we were talking about a couple weeks ago?
Absolutely, Kris. Well, this ring, the ring of the whirlwind, has to do with the amino acid histidine, and both these gates are located in the solar plexus. These are where the current mutations in human genetics are taking place. Last week with the gene key, or the previous session with the gene key 49, we saw the shadow of reaction and its relationship to our capacity to kill those who are not of our tribe, to reject them, to kill them, the basis of racism, the basis of all sorts of isms. But that matures at its gift level to revolution, the energy that stands against all expressions of lower frequency.
Good morning, Dragona. Thanks for joining us this morning.
So that's kind of what we talked about last week.
Mm-hmm.
And the gene key 55, which is called the gate of spirit in the human design, is all about looking at and understanding how we are, how our experience of life is affected by the shadow of victimization. And how at the gift and the acidic level that resolves into freedom. So interestingly, this gene key has only a gift. The gift and the city word are the same.
It's the only one that's like that, isn't it?
It is the only one like that. And this reveals how key it is, how key victimization is, and how key the passage is from the shadow to the gift level of this gift.
Seems like probably one of the most difficult, given our society, how we, when we look around, it seems like everybody wants to blame somebody, or there's all this division and it's their fault, and the politicians, and like it just seems to be like part of the culture.
Very much so. And I mean, even when we feel that we have released it, it still seems to be affecting us. I mean, in a sense, one of the greatest ways it affects us is to have us feel that we are at the mercy of our emotional reactions in life. And you see, as an awareness center, which is not quite mature, the solar plexus, or it has the charge behind our emotions is so powerful that it overrides our mind. And so this emotional attachment energy is what keeps us in the energy of victimization.
Yeah, I don't think we recognize what the emotions are for. Like, we just think that we're responding and that's us. We don't know, or we haven't put together the fact that, oh, I'm having this feeling, this emotion. So what is that telling me? It's giving me information, and we don't look at it like that. We just respond, right? So.
Right. Or we attach to it a reason that is not anything,
Yeah.
Instead of realizing that it has something to do with energy, we try and find a reason behind our states and moods. We try to manipulate them. And this is what keeps us in a place of separation, making us victims of our material reality. But, this is where we have the potential for a true evolution. because this is where we're driven. It's like that metaphor we talked about with the dragonfly, which relates to this 55th gene key. The dragonfly lives in water, in the world of emotion, in the world of mood and feeling. And then at some point, the nymph, the dragonfly nymph, crawls out of the water, expels all the water from its body, and becomes a being of air, a being of a transformed being. And so this reveals to us that if we stop being victims of that emotional connection that we have towards life, it actually becomes the potential thing that propels us into freedom.
Well, I got really excited when I started reading this section when you're talking about what happens when we shift away from the victimization and into freedom, and then what are some of the developments that come out of that. And of course, my passion with kids, right? And I
Yes.
got really excited when I was going through this, but I can see how having these kids come in who will not or cannot engage in that victim mentality or at that level, how this can cause people who are used to dealing like that, like their parents, into like this chaotic state, right? So it's quite interesting when we start looking at these different points. So maybe you can just start going through some of them.
Absolutely. I mean, at the basis of what you just said is the realization that all of us are connected. Makes me think of the current movies that are out, the Avatar movies. We're all connected. So what is it you're reacting to or about? It's often the fear of separation. But as we have these, keep in mind, here's some thoughts about what is going to happen as we've evolved. These are Richard Rudd's thoughts based upon his extensive reading and his understanding of the gene keys. But this idea that the victim consciousness will no longer compute, and we'll have children born who they'll look at adults and they'll say, they'll just have this completely different. They won't get drawn into the adult drama of people believing in being victims. They won't do it. Because in the sense, we are moving away from an energy of me, and I into more of a sense that we're all connected.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
It reminds me of a TikTok that I watched. It was very cute. It was like a little boy, and something had happened to the mom, and he just looked at her and said, "Yeah, but you can decide to change that." And then he's like 4 or something, right? He's like, "Yeah, but you can do anything. You can do anything you want." Like the world of possibilities. Don't be sad. Don't be in that place of, victimization that something went wrong. You can change it, right? And it was so enlightening to watch a child respond that way.
And so many of us are straddling that awareness, Kris. I think we toggle back and forth. I know I do. I'll be in a place of reaction to emotion. And then in other times and spaces, I'll kind of say, whoa, what was that? That's not necessary.
Right.
But these children won't be even tempted to go into that energy. And that's exciting.
Yeah. They won't understand the people around them, though, because there'll still be people that are responding that way, right? Yeah.
Yes. And I mean, we'll look at them and we'll think, the way we think. Sometimes we look at people and we say, well, that's completely socially appropriate what you just did there. It will become inappropriate to be in and act from a victim consciousness.
I think this is part of that. I know one of our mentors was talking about this, how learning to have the kids navigate life, but not be a hazard to society, because they're just going to be point blank. They don't get it and they're just going to respond, right? So how do we raise them to be compassionate beings within the whole, within the collective, right?
Right.
Mhm.
And to be compassionate towards their elders who don't
Mhm.
get it.
Well, and I think that's where the bridge keepers come in, people like us who see the new, we're not there yet, but we see both, right? And
Yes,
it's
and we
about,
are helping to navigate that shift from one dimension to the other.
right, exactly. Yeah. So we
I
can
mean,
see
it's
both.
intriguing to think, as Richard Rudd says, that as we move into more deeply into this evolution, all the shadow frequencies that we have experienced and that we are talking about in this series will actually slowly disappear.
Mhm.
And the gift level of frequency will be the normal and the average. And
You know,
that will create extraordinary
yeah, just
shifts.
like physical evolution, right? You know how you used to have a tail and then the tail fell off, right? But it wasn't like that day, it just got smaller and smaller and smaller until it didn't exist anymore. So I see this
Mhm.
kind of as the same thing in evolution, but on a spiritual and emotional and inner being, as humans, right?
Yes.
Hmm.
And there is so much behind the scenes that's driving this evolution. I like a couple of Richard Rudd's comments along the way. He says, for instance, we needed a population explosion on this planet
Hmm.
because it was necessary in order to drive the coming evolution.
Right.
So rather than it makes me much more hopeful because if I looked at that as one factoid in life, it's like it seems to me pretty disheartening.
Right.
Or this tendency to eat all this processed food with all the salt.
Hmm.
That is another, salt is also one of the things that is driving our evolution at a biological level, and we needed more of it in order to do that. And so some of the things that we consider problems I mean, Richard Rudd is not the be all, end all, but I mean, these are things that, okay, people are intuiting some of these things.
Well, I find it
And
really interesting because it's like in the part where you talk about the salt, you say other changes to our digestion. And I'm like, oh, well, I have nothing but problems with my digestion. So
yeah.
it's like,
And of course,
this is all part of it, right? And then learning what foods, oh, my body doesn't want that anymore. And ooh, it wants this instead. And yeah, so it's interesting. Yeah.
so it opens up the possibility for us to really say, you know what? Evolution has got this. God has got this.
Hmm.
Something behind all of, you know, there's a reason behind all these things that we're experiencing.
The master
And
plan,
so a
right?
master plan.
Yeah, exactly.
I mean, one of the interesting things that Richard said as well is that up till now, enlightenment or the movements into higher states of consciousness have occurred one by one.
Hmm.
Oh, so and so becomes enlightened. Oh, so and so becomes enlightened. But he says in this new age, it's going to start to happen where we become enlightened two by two, where couples who are together in stable pairings,
Hmm.
will become enlightened together. That's another potentially exciting experience for us to be
Yeah, I
looking
think that the way that I see it is that the individuals who became enlightened will now come together in enlightened relationships. And then they will have enlightened children and be able to raise those children and know, hey, this is what's going on versus, what we have in the past few years, right? Where parents just didn't know what.
Well, that could probably be too, but the implication here is that rather than being distractions to our own evolutionary process, now
Mhm.
there will be the possibility of two people coming together and actually helping each other
Evolve.
while they're in relationship get to that point, rather than coming together after.
Right.
So, I mean, we'll have to see how it plays out. It's like,
Mhm.
stay tuned, folks.
Well, and I think too when we talk about entering into relationship and how our definitions of relationships will probably change a bit, like the the traditional, get married, raise kids, picket fence, all of those things. I think that may shift and change as well. Um,
A lot of people have spoken to that, Kris, and they
Yeah.
really feel that as we enter into the age of Aquarius, which is a very loving, but it's not romantic.
Mhm.
So the age of Pisces was a very romantic age and very emotional and
Mhm.
in its own way. And this will be less compulsive because we're going to be less
Mhm.
um, we're going to be very we're going to feel more connected to each other, and so it'll be inherently less compulsive sexually
Mhm.
and inherently less emotional,
Yeah.
and that will make for a lot more spaciousness.
All right. So I noticed that we're getting close to time here. Is there any last minute things you want to say about this particular codon ring?
Yes. The bottom line with freedom is that true freedom arises when we no longer believe that we are separate from life, when we lose our fear of death, and
Mhm.
when we realize that life is trustable. So, ultimate freedom has nothing to do with life circumstances. Freedom arises from the separate self dissolving into the waves of the ocean, so to speak.
Mhm.
Freedom is born from absolute trust in life. That's where freedom comes from.
Right.
So it's about trusting in God, trusting in life, trusting in the process that we're all a part of. That's what
Mhm.
brings freedom. And that is the message behind the evolutionary thrust away from victimization and towards freedom.
Awesome. So do we know what we're going to talk about next week?
No. I mean, I don't have it on the tip of my tongue. I know where we're going, but I don't know what it is.
Okay, beautiful. Well, with that, we hope everybody had a very Merry Christmas. We wish you all the best in the new year, and we will see you in the new year with our next episode. So, God bless and have a beautiful day. Bye.